I know it looks like a Fuji X-T2, but this is indeed a Fuji X-T3. Although, of course, you got this lovely gray flat dead light today, perfect for testing a camera famous for its color, so let's go shoot puddles. Welcome back, DPReview TV viewers. Chris Nichols here from DPReview, and we do indeed have a very early sample of the X-T3. This is pre-production. Now you may be wondering, why are we coming to you guys from a dark alleyway? Well, you know, is it because I want this brand new camera to get stolen? No, Canada's crime rate's incredibly low. It's actually because it's super windy outside, and all of Jordan's compositions today will basically be based on where can we block this wind. Now on top of that, I want you guys to know that Jordan is shooting the entire video today on his own X-T3 sample. It's going to be the 10-bit internal 420 4K, but we're going to talk about that in just a bit. Okay, so obviously you can see we're doing a walk and talk right now, and I'm going to change my distance here because I want to point out a couple things on the camera. Now first off, Jordan is using face detect autofocus for this shot in video, and hopefully it's tracking me quite well. The other thing though is a lack of IBIS on the X-T3. The X-H1 has it, the X-T2 did not, the X-T3 doesn't either, so we're dependent on the image stabilization in the lens. Look how compact this Fuji mirrorless system is. Literally fits in the palm of your hand if you're a giant, bronze statue. When it comes to handling on the X-T3, this is a more compact system. Fuji markets this as the X-H1 being their larger full body and this being more of their compact system. Of course, you can add the grip, and I want to talk about that first. With the earlier Fujis, the grip was responsible for giving you boost modes and optimizing your performance. And on the one hand, although that was a nice upgrade, on the other, you really felt that you had to buy it in order to get the most out of the camera. What I really like about this now, although we do have a battery grip, which gives you extra batteries and extra battery life, it does not enhance the capabilities of the camera. Or I should say that when you buy this camera right out of the box, you don't have to get anything extra to get more features. Now that being said, you might still want to get the battery grip for the vertical ergonomics and also for balancing heavier lenses. And you might also want to get it for better battery life anyways, because I think that's still one of the weaknesses here. We're using the NPW126S. It's not the worst battery out there, but it's not the best. It's quite old, and we're looking at, competing against cameras now like the Sony A7 series. They're getting us a lot more battery life than this, so that's an unfortunate knock. It's not all bad news though. We are getting an improvement in battery life from the X-T2, for example. The CPR rating's just below 400 shots, and although the battery's the same, Fuji's saying that's because of the new quad-core 4th gen processor. It uses less battery power than the 3rd gen dual-core processor you'd find in the X-T2. So of course the light's super flat today, but we did find some color here in Calgary. I'm going to take advantage of that. We're on the topic of color when it comes to Fuji. Of course, you guys already know they've built up an excellent reputation. This is one of their key selling features and benefits is their color science. And what's changed? We've got all the same stuff based on the film stock, the classic chrome, the Astia, the Provia, the Velvia. On the video side, we have the Eterna profile in here, and you can use that for stills as well. And of course, we've got my favorites, monochrome and even more so acros. So what's changed? Well, we actually now have something very exciting for black and white. We have a warm and cool function. You can adjust +9 or -9 levels of warmth to cold to tone your black and white shots. Should be fun. I've got flat light, so I'm going to make that work today, but while we've got color, let's try some of that. Now luckily we live in an age where the modern EVF has gotten so good that it's honestly superior to optical viewfinders in my opinion. and the Fuji X-T3 doesn't disappoint. We've got a beautiful 3.69 million dot EVF. I like that they've pushed it 3 millimeters further off the back of the body to give you more clearance for your nose and your thumb if you're doing the touchscreen autofocus. We've got a lockable diopter, which is a nice touch as well. And we also have an excellent refresh rate. It's around 60 frames per second normally, but when you go into boost mode, it goes up to 100 frames per second. Wildlife and sport shooters are gonna love how smooth that is. What I really don't love though on this camera is the back LCD. I mean, it's sharp, it's clear, it works well, but it's basically the same articulation system as the Fuji X-T2, and I personally never liked that system. I'm confused because we've got an awesome new articulating screen on the more affordable X-T100. It works great, and I'm really sad to see that it didn't make its way to this camera. Now, what about the overall change to the body's handling? It's got a very similar feel and weight to the X-T2, but I do like that we now have dual UHS 2 card slots. That's a nice improvement. And over here on this side, we've got our mic jack and headphone jack, micro HDMI, but we now have a USB-C interface. Now, this is nice because you can charge the battery in camera through this. You can also remove this door completely, which is nice if you're using this on a rig or something. You don't have to worry about this getting in the way. Now, a lot of the dials and controls are still going to be very familiar. We've got these same lockable dials for shutter speed and ISO. Exposure comp works great. And of course, you've got your command dials, which are very customizable in how they work and what you can set them up as. Fuji has tightened them up and made them a little bit, I don't know, more resistant to turning. I do feel though, although that means you're not going to accidentally move it, it actually takes a little bit more power to actually use them. And some of the DPReview staff were saying that they found that they would accidentally push in and touch this quite often because of the extra pressure required to change the dial. Your mileage is going to vary. I'm actually finding it's not too bad. One thing that I still think Fuji needs to work on is the touchscreen interface. This is pre-production. We'll see what happens when the first camera comes out. But I find although you can swipe down and swipe up and left and right as functions, I don't like to use them. I find I trip them when I don't want to. On top of that, autofocusing with the touchscreen, although well implemented, is still quite laggy and slow. Maybe we'll see some improvements there. No, sports fine. I'm turning this touchscreen off, damn it. Now, of course, for any mirrorless camera to be taken seriously as a professional body, it has to be rugged and well sealed, and the X-T3 is built to the same standard as the X-T2. I've personally never really tested it. I mean, I guess I could chuck it in the fountain here. I probably won't. But our very own Dale from DPReview, he actually took one to the North Cascades to shoot some stuff, and apparently it rained the whole time and the camera got soaking wet. He had a 16 to 52.8 on there, weather resistant, and he said the camera performed admirably in that weather. So, you know, Fuji does have a camera which is capable of shooting in very dirty and wet environments. So here's another notable new feature they've added on the X-T3. It's called their Sports Finder mode. Basically, it's going to crop down to 16 megapixels. It's going to give you a 1.25 times crop factor over what the APS chip already does. And this is going to give you this rebate around your actual frame. You'll see your rectangle that you're capturing, and then you'll see around it. The idea being, much like a classic rangefinder or something like that, that you can see the action as it's about to enter into your frames. Some sports and wildlife photographers might find that useful. Me personally, I'd probably just still shoot the old-fashioned way and then go a little bit wider than I want and then crop tighter if I feel I need to. One advantage though is if you use electronic shutter, you can shoot up to 30 frames per second. And on that note, electronic shutter on this camera, it is now shooting at about a 1/60th of a second on the sensor readout. Now, what this is going to give us is somewhat less rolling shutter than we would normally see on Fuji's. Now that's thanks in part to a brand new sensor. Fuji's using a backside illuminated 26 megapixel CMOS chip this time, and it's an X-Trans. And I find that very interesting because it seemed like Fuji was on a bear kick lately and kind of letting X-Trans go by the wayside. With modern technology and higher resolution sensors, we weren't really seeing many benefits to X-Trans, but here we are back to it. It's giving us a native ISO of 160, that's a nice improvement. And although we can't really test the sensor yet because this is not final firmware, final camera production, I am very curious to see what this X-Trans is going to do. Now, Fuji is saying it's going to give us benefits like better noise reduction, especially with longer exposures for astrophotography and things like that. And it also does give us some benefits for autofocus. This new sensor gives them a 425-point phase detect autofocus array with 100% coverage. They've never had this before in a camera. 2.16 million pixels used for that phase detect autofocus array, and it should promise that we get very fast hybrid autofocusing. That's a big thing I know you guys want to hear about, so let's tackle that next. Well, as you can tell, I'm heavily backlit. My face is probably in shadow, but Jordan says that this is a test of the F-Log as opposed to just trying to make me look unattractive on camera. I'm gonna take his word for it. I will take this opportunity and power through to talk about autofocus on the X-T3. This is something I was very curious to see because by far the most exciting thing, Fuji's claiming the X-T3 is able to compete with the big boys out there. I mean, Nikon, Sony, the autofocus on this camera is supposed to be able to compete with that. And that's great because, to be honest, Fuji has always had good autofocus, but never the greatest. If you look at the X-H1, which is Fuji's most advanced mirrorless camera to date, that camera was able to do 60 autofocus calculations simultaneously. The X-T3 can do 240, and it can do that completely independent from the exposure calculations. This should all combine to make this camera the fastest available. This is pre-production. I do want to test the full version of this camera, but even as a testament to the capabilities of this camera, the pre-production autofocusing has really been impressing us. For manually focusing, just to round out the whole talk, they've added one new focusing aid, which is their micro prism system, basically a checkered board grid that you can focus by. It's supposed to emulate retro cameras. Honestly, I don't find it very useful at all, but you still have a lot of the other great features like punch and magnify or split prism, peaking. Those all work very well.
So for the beautiful video features of the X-T3, we had to go to a beautiful location. So here we are out in the Cranston Ridge, and I gotta tell you, there is a lot that's really impressive about this camera. For starters, 4K 60 internal on this guy. So that means, you know, if I'm shooting 4K 60 like I am right now, and I decide I wanna do some slow motion, I can just drop that in whenever I want. That was terrible. I looked terrified when I was doing that. As well, this, if you're using the H.265 compression, you're getting 10-bit internal as well. Now, it's just 420 unlike the GH5, but if you want 422, just throw an external recorder on it and you'll get access to that. What's also really nice is that you can get 120 frames per second right in camera without using an external recorder, and it'll conform it right in the camera. So when you play it back, you'll get to watch it in slow-mo. Now, my favorite thing about Fuji cameras for video is the color profiles. I shot pretty much all of this episode in the Eterna profile, but you also get internal F-Log if you want a lot of dynamic range in the shot. Now, I would still recommend using an external recorder if you're doing a lot of F-Log, but in a pinch, you need high dynamic range in a shot. It's great to have an internal. Video autofocus is one area where Fuji's been making huge improvements, and this is the biggest one they've made yet. If you're using face detect autofocus, I found it could just do a brilliant job. I shot this entire video with it and very rarely did it miss focus, except for one time where it was convinced that it was choosing between Chris's face or a garbage can, but you can see it's an easy mistake to make. They look very similar. Now, there is a drawback if you're not filming a face, because you have to actually keep the focus point on top of your subject. You can't just tap it and have it continuously track like with the Canons and the new Nikon Z system, but if you do keep that focus point on it, it does a great job hanging onto the subject. Manual focus is another area where they've made a huge improvement. We get linear focus with this. We can choose which focus direction it works, but the biggest thing for me is while rolling in 4K, you can still zoom in to check your focus, and when you do that, the image is still very crisp, very clear. So you're confident while filming, you're nailing focus on your subject. A thing people don't pay attention to a lot of the time that makes a huge difference is the quality of the preamps. This is a much improved preamp from what we've seen before with Fuji. I found with the internal audio, I was very rarely getting any kind of hiss, anything like that. And the way they display your levels is much smarter now. You just move it from negative gain up to 0 decibel gain, then you know when you're starting to really apply too much gain to the audio signal. Now, the other thing I really like is we now have zebras on it. We have a live histogram while we're shooting, and we get focus peaking even while recording 4K. All these are awesome to have, but I would still love to see, well, vector scopes, but especially waveforms in a more video-centric model. But this is Fuji, maybe they'll add it in firmware. So I had a great time shooting with the X-T3, but there's still a few things that did really piss me off with it today. For starters, battery life is not great. I went through 5 batteries today. I was getting under an hour of roll time per battery. Other thing, this little tilty design is far from my favorite, as Chris mentioned, for photo, but a full flip screen would be wonderful for video recording. As well, the great autofocus on this means it would be a wonderful run and gun camera, but we don't have the inbuilt image stabilization from the X-H1, and that means this is a camera that's going to live on a monopod like it is today, or on a gimbal on a tripod. Other thing, it's small, but it's a really small HDMI port on the side of this, and you will be breaking a lot of micro HDMI cables if you use that external recorder to get the 422 out of it. But most of these are not deal breakers. This is the best video thing Fuji has ever made, and I am so excited for the future of this line.
You know, when you look at the X-T3, it basically looks the same as the X-T1, the X-T2. You've got that same classic styling. It's arguably one of the most beautiful cameras out there in production, and if you argued against that, you'd be wrong. On top of that, we've got that classic dial construction and feel. They've done some tweaks, but the thing I still love about the X-T3 is if it behaves in a way that you don't like, you can change it. You can customize it. As a photographer, you can really make this camera your own, and there's a lot to be said for that. On top of that, it really comes down to the main takeaways. That new processor and sensor, I mean, of course, better video that we've seen, better image quality, but also it really enhances this camera's capabilities and makes it comparable to a lot of the professional cameras out there on the market now. And keep in mind too that you've got the largest line of native APS-C mirrorless lenses to back up this camera. So all in all, I think this is going to be a very capable camera, and it's very well thought out. Keep in mind too, just, you know, you're probably saying like, okay, wait, hang on, you guys are being way too nice to this camera. You got to remember though that we're very fortunate to have this camera early. Stay tuned, we will do a full review on this, and as always, we will be dead honest about what we like and what we don't like. Don't forget, check out DPReview.com. We're going to have reviews coming up, articles, sample galleries. That will all come out shortly as this camera gets closer to market. And if you're a Fuji user, I think you're going to love this one, especially the autofocus capability. And if you're not a Fuji user, this might very well win you over. Go to our Instagram feeds, let us know what you think there. Go to Twitter and comment, and please comment below. Don't forget to subscribe if you like the video, but hopefully you do. And if you do, maybe we'll see you again very soon.